your friends that you were just referring to
Yeah.
in the security world spend a lot of time not worrying about sequester in the last few days, but something you've been writing about for a long time, which is computer hackers from
Yes.
a place called China, mostly, having an awful lot of success. And I guess the reality is, you've known that, but everybody else is discovering it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The whole hacking issue seems to kind of come and go in salience. And I think just lately, in the last few weeks, really, we've just kind of seen a big uptick. And sometimes these stories feed on each other. We actually saw something similar at the beginning of 2010 when Google was hacked, and everybody thought that this was going to lead to companies being more comfortable about talking openly about getting hacked, and people were going to have a much greater appreciation of how widespread it was and how, just how constant it was, and then that didn't happen. So it will be interesting to see how sustained the current interest is, because what we've seen here, which is a little different from a few years ago, was the confluence of at least some initial government actions. We had an executive order out of the White House that was announced last week to kind of promote the bolstering of cybersecurity defenses in the private sector, and then yesterday we saw an effort to crack down on the theft of trade secrets. And in the interim, we've seen lots of stories about the media getting hacked and additional Chinese hacking endeavors that in the cybersecurity world have kind of been known, but it's taken on a much greater elevated importance in the political context.
So clearly, if you want to get attention for an issue like this, you got to affect the press. You hit the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, you get on the front page. Right? But
the Chinese are worried about that.
Are they?
Yeah. They do not like the idea that the media, they would be in some sort of tussle with the media. So it'll be interesting also to see how this plays out kind of geopolitically.
Wait, does the U.S. either corporate or public sector ever think of an offense here, or are we mostly talking about defense?
The U.S. has thought about offense for quite some time. It's been the idea of going on the offense in cyberspace basically means just launching a cyber attack on somebody else, and we certainly saw some examples of that with this Stuxnet virus that mucked about in the Iran's nuclear program. But I mean, I think the U.S. has certainly been in the offensive business for a long time. It's still very tentative, both about employing it and certainly about talking about it. I mean, it still basically requires a sign-off from the president to authorize an offensive operation.
I still think in the longer run that the implications of this may be bigger in the private sector than in the government sector. And those of us who talk with business leaders know how we were talking about this earlier, how incredibly worried they are and have been for several years about their vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. I was at a conference that the Wall Street Journal had with chief information officers, and I had a little bit of a hard time making conversation during the cocktail party, so my standing line was, so what do you worry about? Yeah. Every one of them said hacking, cybersecurity. Yeah. Well, every one of them. No one said anything else.
Because they're stealing tons and tons of information.
They being lots of different people, not just
people.
the Chinese.
It is the Chinese, but it's lots of folks, and it's also, I mean, for the financial sector, it's all the Russian cybercrime gangs, and the banks have been contending with these Iranian cyber attacks. So it's a whole mix of stuff, and what's been really difficult, I think, from the standpoint of companies is actually figuring out how much they're losing out of it. I mean, they can calculate, downtime if their website is knocked offline. They can certainly calculate losses when money is stolen, but calculating the cost of intellectual property theft is really difficult.
And meanwhile, if they find out, they really don't want to admit it.
They certainly don't want to admit it, even if you're the Wall Street Journal.